My parents forced me and my siblings into identical copies. I had no idea how far they would go. When I was 6 and my youngest sister was barely 2, my parents started forcing us to match perfectly. Same weight, same haircuts, measured with a ruler, the same clothes, even though we were different ages and different sizes. Every morning, we had to line up while Mom measured our hair. If anyone's hair was even a tiny bit longer than the others, she would cut it right there. The matching became dangerous once we hit puberty. Our sister Violet developed early, and Mom wrapped her chest so tightly with ace bandages that she passed out in gym class. Then Mom stuffed the rest of us into padded bras so we would match her. We had to dye our hair the same shade every 2 weeks, and the chemicals burned our scalps so badly that we had scabs. Then Ruby's voice stayed high while ours got deeper, so she was forced to practice speaking lower until she lost her voice completely for a month. Teachers could not tell us apart, and we were not allowed to correct them. I wanted to try out for soccer, but Violet hated sports, and in our family, if one of us did something, all of us had to do it. Ruby was amazing at violin, but she had to quit because the rest of us were terrible, and her being good at something made her different. I got my period at 11 and had to hide it for 2 years until Violet got hers. I used wadded-up toilet paper because asking for pads would reveal that we were not identical. The shame of bleeding through my pants in class while pretending nothing was wrong still makes me sick. Our bodies kept growing differently, because that is what bodies do. Hazel shot up 5 inches one summer, and Dad made her slouch constantly until her spine got messed up. Ruby stayed tiny, so they put huge lifts in her shoes that made her ankles swell. Then our faces started changing too. Violet's nose got wider. Hazel developed sharp cheekbones. Ruby's eyes stayed rounder than ours. Our parents tried everything from face exercises to sleeping in masks that were supposed to reshape our bones. When I turned 15, I tried to run away. I made it to the bus station before they caught me. After that, they installed locks on our bedroom doors that only locked from the outside. They put cameras in every room and made us check in every hour we were awake. If one of us went to the bathroom for too long, Mom would bang on the door, screaming about secret individuality. They pulled all of us out of regular school and started homeschooling us, so no one could corrupt us with ideas about being different people. I felt like I was drowning in sameness. I was losing track of where I ended and where my sisters began. That was when they found a doctor who had lost his license in America, but was still operating in Mexico. He examined us like livestock, taking measurements while talking about fixing us. He would shave down Hazel's cheekbones, widen Ruby's nose, narrow Violet's, and pin back my ears to match Ruby's. He would even alter our hairlines and our lips, so we would be exactly identical. My parents paid him $20,000 up front and scheduled everything for 2 weeks after my 16th birthday. A week before we were supposed to leave for Mexico, Violet tried to end her life by swallowing a bottle of sleeping pills. She survived, but the hospital asked questions about the scars on her chest from years of binding. Our parents lied and said she had done it to herself because she had body image issues. Then they used it as proof that we needed the surgeries to be happy. They moved up our surgery date to 3 days later, before any social workers could investigate. Mom packed while Dad lectured us about how Violet's selfishness was just fear of becoming perfect. They had already told everyone we were going to a special camp. The van to the airport was coming at 4 in the morning. That night, they made us take sleeping pills, so we would not try running. I pretended to swallow mine, but I spit it out when Mom looked away. I stayed awake, listening to my sisters breathe, knowing that in 12 hours we would be in surgery. Mom had shown us the final plan, and it included things she had not mentioned before, like removing ribs to make our torsos identical and altering our vocal cords so our voices would match permanently. At 3:45 in the morning, the van pulled up. They carried my drugged sisters out one by one while I pretended to be asleep. As Dad lifted me, I stayed limp, waiting for my chance to run once we got outside. My heart was beating so loudly, I was sure he would notice. But as he reached the van, I felt something sharp prick my neck. Mom stood there with a syringe, smiling. "Did you really think we would trust the pills alone?" she asked as my vision blurred. "We have been planning this for years." The drugs hit fast, and my body went truly limp as they loaded me into the van beside my sisters. The last thing I saw was the airport sign as we merged onto the highway, and I knew that none of us would wake up from those surgeries as ourselves. Except the drugs did not knock me out completely. My body went limp the way Mom wanted, but my brain stayed awake enough to know what was happening. I kept my eyes almost closed, just tiny slits, so I could see the dashboard lights and the dark road passing by. Mom sat in the passenger seat, running through their story out loud. She practiced how she would tell airport staff that we were going to a special arts camp in Mexico. Dad corrected her twice about which city we were flying into, and she snapped at him to get it right because one wrong detail could ruin everything. My sisters breathed slowly and heavily next to me, actually knocked out by whatever pills they had taken. The van smelled like the vanilla air freshener Mom always used, and the chemical smell from the hair dye we had used 2 days before. I counted the exit signs we passed, trying to stay focused and not let the drugs pull me under. Exit 7. Exit 9. Exit 11. My heart beat so hard that I worried they would hear it in the quiet van. Dad merged onto the airport exit ramp, and the big blue sign with the airplane symbol lit up in our headlights. This was it. This was really happening. Unless someone at the airport noticed something was wrong with 4 unconscious teenage girls. Dad pulled into the departure drop-off lane, where other early morning travelers were unloading their bags. He got out, opened the sliding door, and cold air rushed in, making me want to shiver. I forced myself to stay completely still. He grabbed a luggage cart from the rack nearby and wheeled it over. I felt his hands under my arms as he lifted me out and placed me on the metal cart. My head lolled to the side. He loaded Violet next to me, then Ruby, then Hazel, arranging us like we were cargo instead of people. Mom came around and started fussing with our matching pink hoodies. She zipped mine up higher and smoothed down Hazel's hair. She pulled at Ruby's sleeve to make it match the others exactly, muttering about how we needed to look perfect even now. Through my barely open eyes, I saw people walking past with rolling suitcases. A woman in a business suit stared at us for a long moment, her face confused. A man with 2 kids slowed down to look. Then they all kept walking toward the terminal doors. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked questions. They just looked away, like we were something uncomfortable they did not want to deal with. Mom pushed the cart through the automatic doors into the terminal, and the bright fluorescent lights hit my closed eyelids like knives. The sudden brightness made my eyes water, but I could not wipe the tears away. I heard the echo of announcements bouncing off the high ceilings, something about unattended bags and security alerts. The wheels of the cart squeaked against the shiny floor. Dad walked next to us, carrying our 4 passports in a folder with all the Mexico paperwork. My head bounced slightly with each push of the cart, and I had to concentrate hard on keeping my body limp and my breathing steady. The terminal was mostly empty that early in the morning. There were only a few tired travelers scattered around. We passed a coffee shop that was not open yet, and a closed gift shop with its metal gate pulled down. The overhead lights were so bright they hurt even through my eyelids. Mom's shoes clicked against the floor in that fast rhythm that meant she was nervous. She was pushing the cart faster now, heading toward the international check-in counters at the far end of the terminal. The airline agent looked up from her computer screen as we approached. I could see her through my eyelashes. She was maybe in her 30s, with her hair pulled back in a bun. She glanced at her screen, then at us, then back at her screen. Her eyebrows pulled together, and she tilted her head slightly. She typed something on her keyboard, and her frown got deeper. Then she picked up her phone and made a quick call. Within a minute, another agent in a supervisor vest came over. They had a quiet conversation while looking at us. The supervisor pointed at something on the computer screen. The first agent nodded and gestured toward us on the cart. I felt a tiny spark of hope flicker in my chest. Someone was noticing. Someone was seeing that something was wrong with 4 identical teenage girls who were not moving or responding. The supervisor leaned closer to get a better look at us, and I saw her mouth move in a question to my parents. I knew this was my chance. I forced my eyes to focus, even though the drugs made everything blurry. The agent leaned down closer to check if we were breathing, her face coming into clear view just inches from mine. I gathered every bit of control I had left and let one single tear slide down my cheek. It rolled slowly and obviously down to my jaw. Her eyes went wide, and she jerked back fast, her hand reaching for the phone on the counter. She said something sharp to the supervisor and pointed right at my face. The supervisor's expression changed completely, and she grabbed the phone too. Mom started talking in that sweet voice, explaining something, but the agents were not listening anymore. They were making calls and looking at us with concern and alarm instead of mild confusion. 3 minutes later, an airport police officer walked up fast, his hand resting on his belt. He was tall and black, with kind eyes that looked at us first before turning to my parents. His name tag said Hayes, and he pulled out a small notebook. He asked my parents why 4 teenagers were completely unresponsive at 4 in the morning. Dad launched into the story they had practiced. His voice was smooth and reasonable. He explained that we were anxious flyers who got nervous about traveling. He said Mom had given us some medication to help us rest for the flight. He smiled, that charming smile he used with teachers and doctors, the one that usually made people trust him and stop asking questions. Mom jumped in with more details, her voice sweet and concerned, like she was the most caring mother in the world. She talked about the special arts camp in Mexico we were attending. She said we had been so excited that we could not sleep for days. She explained how she had given us something mild and safe to help us rest for the long flight. She used words like responsible parenting and their best interests and just want them to be comfortable. She was using the exact same tone she had used with the hospital staff when Violet tried to die, the voice that made her sound like a devoted mom who only wanted to help her daughters, the voice that usually worked on everyone. Officer Hayes crouched down next to the cart, his face level with mine. He gently lifted my hand in his. His skin was warm against my cold fingers. He spoke quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. He said that if I could hear him, I should squeeze his thumb. I gathered every bit of strength I had left in my drugged body. I focused all my energy on my hand. I squeezed as hard as I could. It was not very hard because of whatever Mom had injected into my neck, but I squeezed. His whole body went completely still. His eyes locked on my face, and his grip on my hand tightened slightly. He had felt it. He knew I was conscious. He knew something was very wrong. Hayes stood up fast and pulled the radio from his belt. He called for EMS in a voice that was calm but urgent. Then he told my parents nobody was boarding any plane until medical personnel checked us out. Within 2 minutes, 2 paramedics rushed over with their equipment bags. They started checking our vital signs. One took my pulse while the other checked Violet. The first paramedic lifted my eyelid and shined a light in my eye, then did the same to Ruby. He said something to his partner about our pupils being way too small. The second paramedic checked our breathing with a stethoscope and said it was too shallow for normal sleep. They looked at each other, then at Officer Hayes, with expressions that said this was not right. Mom's voice got higher and tighter. She insisted we were fine and that we were going to miss our flight. She said they were making a big deal out of nothing. She kept talking about the camp and how we would be late, and how all of this was unnecessary. Dad put his hand on her arm, probably trying to signal for her to calm down, but I could see the panic starting to crack through their perfect parent act. Mom's sweet voice had an edge to it now. Dad's smile looked forced and tight. The paramedics kept checking us and talking to Officer Hayes, and I knew our parents could feel control slipping away from them for the first time in years. The first paramedic leaned closer to check my pulse again, and his fingers brushed against my neck where Mom had stuck the needle. He froze for a second, then gently turned my head to get a better look. His partner came over fast, and they both stared at the small red mark, with the tiny bit of blood still fresh on my skin. The first paramedic pulled out his radio and called for his supervisor, while the second paramedic moved to check Violet. He found the same mark on her neck in the exact same spot. Then he checked Ruby and found another one. Then Hazel. All 4 of us had identical injection sites that were still red and fresh. The supervisor's voice crackled back over the radio, asking for details. The first paramedic said something about multiple minors with signs of forced sedation and possible non-voluntary medication. He looked straight at Officer Hayes and said that this did not look like anxiety medication given by a parent. This looked like someone deliberately drugging kids who did not want to be drugged. Hayes wrote something in his notebook, and his jaw got tight. He walked over to where my parents were standing together near the check-in counter and asked Dad to step aside with him to verify our identification documents. Dad's face showed surprise, but he followed Hayes a few feet away while another officer moved closer to Mom. Hayes pulled out his notebook and started asking Dad questions about our trip. Where exactly in Mexico were we going? What city? What was the name of the facility? Dad answered quickly, saying we were going to a camp in Tijuana. Hayes wrote it down. Then he walked back to Mom and asked her the same questions. She said we were going to Mexicali for a special program. Hayes looked down at his notebook, where he had written both answers, and his eyebrows went up. He asked Mom again to confirm the city name, and she said Mexicali. Definitely Mexicali. He showed her what Dad had said, and her face went white. She started talking fast about how they were both right. The program had locations in both cities. They were just confused about which facility we would be starting at first. But Hayes kept writing, and his expression said he did not believe her at all. He pulled out an evidence camera from his belt and came back over to where I was lying on the cart. He took several photos of the injection mark on my neck from different angles. The flash was bright even through my closed eyelids. Then he photographed the marks on all my sisters. He stepped away and spoke into his radio, using codes I did not understand. But I heard the word trafficking twice, and something about possible abuse codes. Mom heard it too, because she started crying immediately. But these were not sad tears or scared tears. Her face was angry, and her voice was high and tight when she said they were being ridiculous. We were just a family trying to take a trip. How dare they suggest something so horrible? The tears ran down her face, but her eyes looked mad, not sad. A woman in a gray pantsuit came walking fast across the terminal toward us. She had a badge clipped to her belt and a phone pressed to her ear. She finished her call and introduced herself to Hayes as Christina Owens from CPS On Call. She said she had gotten the alert about our case, and she needed to tell him something important. There was already an open report from 2 weeks ago, when Violet had been in the hospital. The hospital had flagged concerns about injuries on her chest from binding materials, and they had wanted to do a full evaluation. But our parents had removed Violet from the hospital before the social worker could finish the assessment. Christina said the case had been assigned to a worker who was trying to schedule a home visit. But now here we were, at the airport, about to leave the country. Hayes showed her the photos of our injection marks and the notes about our parents giving different city names. Christina looked at the photos for a long time. Then she looked at my parents, then back at Hayes. The airline supervisor came over and said our boarding was officially denied. We would need full medical clearance before any travel would be approved. And that clearance would have to come from the airport medical staff and CPS. Hayes and Christina started walking toward the airport medical clinic and told our parents to follow with us. Dad immediately started arguing about our rights and how they could not force us to go anywhere. Mom was still crying and saying they were being persecuted for their parenting choices. But Hayes just kept walking and gestured for the paramedics to bring us along. Dad and Mom had to follow or be left behind. We got halfway across the terminal when Dad suddenly grabbed Mom's arm and they both turned toward the parking garage. Hayes saw it and moved fast to block their path. He said very clearly that if they attempted to leave with us or interfere with the medical evaluation, they would be detained immediately. Dad's face went bright red, and he started yelling about false imprisonment and illegal detention. But 2 more officers appeared from somewhere and stood on either side of Hayes. Dad stopped yelling. His mouth snapped shut. Mom kept crying, but she did not try to leave again. The airport clinic was small and bright, with white walls and the smell of cleaning chemicals. A nurse in blue scrubs met us at the door and directed the paramedics to wheel us into separate curtained areas. Another woman came in wearing the same blue scrubs, with a badge that said her name was Albina Maher and that she was a forensic nurse. She started with me, pulling the curtain closed around my exam area. She spoke softly, asking if I could hear her, explaining what she was going to do. She checked my vital signs first, then gently lifted my shirt to examine my torso. Her hand stopped moving when she saw the scars across my chest. Long red lines where the binding materials Violet had to wear had rubbed against my skin too, because Mom made me wear the same things to match her. Albina's face stayed calm, but her eyes got sad. She pulled my shirt back down and carefully parted my hair to look at my scalp. She found the chemical burns from years of hair dye, the places where the skin was still rough and damaged. She took photos of everything with a medical camera, documenting each injury carefully. I heard her move to the next curtained area to examine one of my sisters. Christina Owens pushed aside my curtain and came in. She pulled a chair close to the exam table and sat down so her face was level with mine. She explained very gently that she was starting emergency protective custody proceedings. That meant we would not be going home with our parents that day. We would be staying somewhere safe while the investigation happened. The relief hit me so hard that my whole body started shaking. I could not control it. I trembled all over like I was freezing, even though the room was warm. Albina came back in and wrapped a warm blanket around my shoulders, tucking it in carefully. Through the curtain, I heard Mom's voice, sweet and concerned, talking to Christina. She was telling stories about how dedicated she was to us, how she only wanted us to reach our full potential, how she had sacrificed everything to help us become the best versions of ourselves. Christina's voice came back calm and professional. She said the medical evidence spoke for itself, the injection marks, the binding scars, the chemical burns. The custody decision was not negotiable right now. Mom's voice got higher, more desperate, but Christina did not change her tone at all. 2 nurses came in with wheelchairs and started getting us ready to transport to the main hospital for full evaluations. They wheeled us out one by one through different doors. I ended up in a hospital room by myself. The door closed, and suddenly I was alone in a space without my sisters right next to me. For the first time since I was 6 years old, I was in a room by myself. The space felt huge and empty and wrong. The silence was so loud it hurt my ears. I almost called out for them. I almost yelled their names to make sure they were still close. But then I remembered that this separation, this awful, lonely feeling, might actually be what saved us. So I stayed quiet and let the space stay empty around me. A soft knock pulled me back from the empty feeling, and Albina came through the door carrying a large black camera with a flash attachment. She asked if it was okay to take pictures of my injuries for the court case. I nodded, because showing proof felt like the only power I had left. She started with my scalp, gently parting sections of my hair to photograph the rough patches where years of chemical dye had burned the skin until it scarred over. The camera clicked and flashed as she moved methodically, documenting each area of damage with the same careful attention she had used during the initial exam. She asked me to lift my shirt and photograph the red lines across my ribs, where the binding materials had rubbed my skin raw, even though I was not the one who needed binding. Each flash felt like it was freezing the evidence in place, making it real and permanent in a way that scared me, but also made me feel believed. Albina moved to photograph my arms next, capturing the bruises from where Dad had grabbed me when he carried me to the van. Then she photographed the injection site on my neck, which was already turning purple. She thanked me quietly when she finished and said those photos would help keep us safe. Christina came in right after Albina left, pulling the chair close to my bed again and asking if I felt ready to talk about what had happened. I tried to explain about the surgery plans and the Mexican doctor, but the sedative was still making everything fuzzy. My words came out wrong and slow. I got frustrated trying to make my mouth work right, trying to tell her about the rib removal and the vocal cord changes, but the sentences kept falling apart halfway through. Christina reached over and squeezed my hand gently. She told me it was okay, and that we could talk more when the drugs wore off completely. She stayed sitting there even though I could not talk right, just being present while I struggled through the fog. Outside my door, I heard Mom's voice getting louder, demanding to see me and insisting she had a right to be present for any interviews. Dad's voice joined hers, angry and sharp, and the sound of it made my chest go tight, with an old fear that lived in my bones. Hospital security must have been blocking the door, because I heard a calm male voice explaining that only authorized personnel were allowed in patient rooms right now. Dad started yelling about his rights as a parent and how this was illegal detention. His voice rose to that dangerous pitch that used to make all of us freeze. The security guard's voice stayed level and firm. He did not move from his position. and I realized he was not scared of Dad at all. Christina looked toward the door, then back at me. She asked if I felt safe with the guard there. I nodded, even though hearing Dad's anger through the door made me want to hide under the bed. Hayes appeared in my doorway about 20 minutes later, nodding to the security guard before coming in to talk to Christina. He said he had secured warrants to search our house for the bedroom door locks, the surveillance cameras, and any other evidence of what our parents were planning. The judge had signed off in less than an hour once he saw the photos of our injection marks and heard about the Mexico trip. Christina asked about the timeline, and Hayes said his team was executing the search warrant right now, collecting the cameras, the locks, and Mom's measurement logs. I felt this weird mix of relief and guilt, knowing strangers were going through our house and documenting all the ways our parents had controlled us. A nurse suddenly rushed past my door, almost running, and I heard her calling out a code for a psychiatric emergency. My heart stopped completely, because I knew that code was for Violet's room. She had already tried to die once. Now we were separated, and she was alone with her fear. I tried to sit up, but Christina put a gentle hand on my shoulder and told me to stay put. Violet had a whole team with her, and they knew what they were doing. I lay back down, but my whole body was shaking. I was terrified that Violet had found another way to escape, and this time, nobody would catch it in time. Christina left to check on what was happening, and I was alone again with only the sound of people moving quickly down the hall and the beeping of my monitors. Albina came back about 30 minutes later looking pale and shaken. She sat down heavily in the chair next to my bed. She explained very carefully exactly what procedures the Mexican doctor had been planning to do to us, using clinical words that made it sound like a medical textbook. Facial bone reduction to shave down Hazel's cheekbones and reshape our faces to match. Rib resection to remove ribs and make our torsos the same size and shape. Vocal cord modification to alter the pitch and tone of our voices so we would sound identical. She listed each procedure with its medical name and its risks. Hearing it all laid out like a chart of planned surgeries made my stomach turn over hard. I asked if Violet was okay. Albina said she was stable now. It had been a panic attack, not another attempt, but they were moving her to a more secure unit for better monitoring. Christina returned carrying a folder full of papers and sat down to show me printouts of emails between Mom and the Mexican clinic. Her digital forensics team had pulled everything from our parents' phones with a search warrant. The emails included detailed measurements of each of our faces and bodies, with notes in Mom's handwriting about which features needed to be corrected to achieve perfect matching. I saw my own measurements listed there. My nose width, my ear angle, my jaw shape. All of it was marked as needing adjustment. There were photos attached showing each of our faces from multiple angles, with lines drawn on them marking where the doctor would cut. Christina asked if I recognized the clinic name, and I told her yes. I had seen it on paperwork at home when Mom was organizing the trip. She immediately pulled out her phone and called someone about international medical licensing and cross-border patient safety alerts. Her voice was urgent and professional. She squeezed my hand while she talked and said I had just helped protect other kids who might have been taken there. The clinic would be flagged and investigated now. The weight of that felt huge, knowing other families existed who might do the same thing our parents had tried. Christina explained that a court hearing was scheduled for that afternoon to determine temporary custody. A lawyer named Bridget Ainsworth had been appointed as our guardian ad litem to represent what was best for us. I did not fully understand what guardian ad litem meant, but Christina said it was someone whose only job was to figure out what we actually needed and tell the judge. She said Bridget would probably come talk to me before the hearing to get my input. I felt overwhelmed by all these new people and systems and legal terms, but at least they were asking what we needed, instead of deciding for us the way our parents always had. I lay there trying to process everything when I heard a faint sound through the air vent near the ceiling. A whisper that sounded like my name. I held my breath and listened harder. Then I heard it again. Ruby's voice, hoarse and damaged, but definitely hers, whispering my name through the connected ventilation system. I whispered back. And we figured out we could hear each other through the vents if we talked quietly. We could not have a real conversation, but we started tapping simple patterns on the wall between our rooms. 3 taps meant I'm here. 2 taps meant I'm scared. 4 taps meant I love you. We kept tapping back and forth, this basic communication that felt like a lifeline. It proved we were still connected, even though we were in separate rooms for the first time in 10 years. A nurse knocked and came in carrying a plastic bag with my name on it. She pulled out my phone and handed it to me, explaining that they had gotten it from the things Dad was carrying when he was separated from us at the airport. I turned it on and saw 17 missed calls from Mom's number and 3 voicemails. The most recent one was from Dad's phone. I pressed play and heard his voice, tight and angry, telling me this was all my fault for being ungrateful and tearing the family apart when they were only trying to make us special. He said we could have been perfect together. We could have been something amazing that nobody else in the world was, and I had thrown it away by causing a scene at the airport. The guilt hit my stomach like a fist, hot and sharp, making me feel sick. But then I touched the injection mark on my neck, still sore and slightly swollen, and thought about the surgery plans with the rib removal and vocal cord changes. The guilt cooled down fast, turning into something clearer and harder. They were not trying to make us special. They were trying to make us the same. There is a huge difference between those two things. Christina came back a few hours later, carrying a plain spiral notebook and a pen. She sat down next to my bed and explained that she wanted me to write down what happened in my own words, just for my own record. Nobody else had to see it unless I wanted them to. She said it might help me process everything. It would also be there if I ever needed to remember details later. I took the notebook and started writing, beginning with the morning they told us about the Mexico trip. But as I wrote, I noticed I kept using we and us for everything, like we were one person instead of four. We felt scared. We did not want to go. We tried to hide. I stopped and stared at the words, realizing that I had lost track of where I ended and where my sisters began. Christina noticed me staring and asked what was wrong. I showed her the page. She nodded slowly, then suggested I try rewriting it using I and my own name. It felt strange and wrong at first, like I was lying by claiming experiences as only mine. But I forced myself to do it. I felt scared. I did not want to go. I tried to hide. Seeing my individual experience written out separately for the first time made my chest feel tight, but also somehow lighter. That evening, Christina came back looking concerned, holding her phone. She showed me a local news website that had posted a brief story about an incident at the airport involving possible child endangerment. The article did not use our names or give many details. It only said 4 minors were taken into protective custody after concerning circumstances at the international terminal. Even though they kept us anonymous, fear shot through me. Our neighbors knew we were supposed to be going on a trip. Kids from our old school might remember us. What if people started talking and sharing the story, and eventually someone connected it to our family? Christina must have seen the panic on my face, because she sat down and explained very clearly that cases like ours are sealed by law. Our identities were protected. News outlets were not allowed to publish information that could identify us. She promised me over and over that we were safe from exposure. But the fear still sat heavy in my chest like a weight I could not shift. Christina spent the next several hours on her phone. I could hear her through the door talking to different people about foster placements. Most homes were not set up to take 4 teenage girls all at once. Some had space for 2, others could take 3, but nobody had room for all 4 of us together. The possibility of being split up after everything we had been through made me feel physically sick. We had been forced to be identical for 10 years. Now that we finally had a chance to be separate people, we might actually get separated for real. I wanted to be my own person. But I did not want to lose my sisters completely. Christina came back into my room later and promised she was still trying to find a placement that could keep us together, but I could tell from her face that it was not looking good. The next morning, Hayes and his team executed the search warrant on our house. Christina showed me photos. They texted her as they went through each room, documenting everything. They found the locks on our bedroom doors that only opened from the outside, installed so we could not get out at night. They found cameras in every single room, including the bathroom, all feeding to monitors in our parents' bedroom, so they could watch us constantly. They found Mom's detailed logs going back years, tracking our hair measurements down to the millimeter with notes about who needed cutting. They found the ace bandages she used to bind Violet's chest and the padded bras she made the rest of us wear to match. They found the notebook with our class schedules from when we were still in regular school, the one Mom had sent to the Mexican doctor so he could plan the surgery timing. Hayes and his team took photos of everything and loaded it all into evidence bags. Christina said the amount of documentation they found was actually helpful for the case, because it proved this was not strict parenting. It was planned and systematic control. While Hayes was searching the house, other investigators went door to door interviewing our neighbors. Christina got copies of their statements and read some of them to me. Multiple neighbors confirmed they never saw us outside separately. We were always together, always moving as a group. One neighbor said we always wore matching outfits and walked in a line like little soldiers. Another mentioned that we never played with other kids in the neighborhood. The statement that made me angriest was from the woman who lived 3 houses down. She told the investigator she thought it was cute how coordinated we were, like we were a matched set or a synchronized swimming team. That word, cute, made me want to scream. Nobody questioned whether cute was actually control. Nobody wondered if 4 teenage girls moving in perfect unison might be a sign that something was wrong. They just thought it was charming and different, and then they moved on with their day. Bridget Ainsworth came to meet me in the afternoon. She was probably in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back and direct eyes that looked at me like she actually wanted to hear what I had to say. She introduced herself as my guardian ad litem and explained that her job was to figure out what was actually best for me and my sisters, then tell the judge. She pulled a chair close to my bed and asked me a question nobody else had asked yet. She wanted to know what I actually wanted to happen, not what I thought I was supposed to say, not what would make adults happy, what I wanted. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I told her I wanted to feel safe, and I wanted my sisters to be safe. I did not want to punish my parents as much as I just wanted them to stop. I wanted them to understand that what they did was wrong, but I did not know if that was possible. Bridget wrote down everything I said without judging me or trying to convince me to feel differently. She said my feelings were valid, even if they were complicated. It was okay to want safety without wanting revenge. The emergency custody hearing happened that afternoon in a small courtroom that felt more like a conference room. There was just the judge behind his desk, lawyers on both sides, Christina, Bridget, and my parents with their attorney. I was not required to be there since it was only about temporary custody, not the full case. Christina recorded it on her phone so I could hear what happened later if I wanted. My parents' lawyer spent most of his time arguing that CPS was persecuting a family for their homeschooling choices and traditional values. He kept saying things about religious freedom and parental rights, trying to make this about belief systems instead of what my parents had actually done to us. He claimed the airport incident was a misunderstanding. He said we had voluntarily taken medication, and my parents were being responsible by monitoring us. He said the planned procedures in Mexico were cosmetic choices that lots of families make, like braces or acne treatment. Listening to him twist everything made me feel crazy, like he was describing a completely different reality than the one I had lived. The judge let the lawyer finish. Then he started going through the evidence. He looked at the photos of our injuries, the binding scars, the chemical burns, and the injection marks. He read the emails about the surgery plans out loud, including the parts about rib removal and vocal cord alteration. He listened to Albina's testimony about the serious medical risks we were facing, and how some of the planned procedures could have caused permanent damage or even death. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm and clear. He ordered us removed from our parents' custody temporarily. He said they could only have supervised visitation at approved facilities. He scheduled a full hearing for 3 weeks later. I listened to the recording in my hospital bed and felt like I could breathe a little easier. But I also felt guilty for the relief. Like being glad to be away from my parents made me a bad daughter, even though they had literally drugged us and planned to surgically alter our bodies without real consent. Christina came to my room after the hearing, looking tired but determined. She sat down and explained the placement situation honestly. She had found a foster home that could take 3 of us together, but not 4. She asked if one of us would be willing to go to a separate foster home so the other 3 could stay together, since that was the best option available right now. I volunteered immediately. The words came out before I even thought about them. I was the oldest. I was the one who got us into this by getting caught pretending to sleep instead of staying unconscious like my sisters. I should be the one to sacrifice. Christina looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked if I was sure, or if I was just doing what I thought I was supposed to do. I told her I was sure, even though I was not completely sure, because somebody had to make the choice and I thought it should be me. That night, Christina drove me to a foster home about 20 minutes away, in a neighborhood with trees lining the streets and houses that all looked different from each other. A couple in their 60s opened the door and introduced themselves, but I was so tired I barely registered their names. They showed me to a small bedroom on the 2nd floor with pale blue walls and a window that looked out at the backyard. The woman opened the closet and showed me 3 different sets of pajamas hanging there. She asked which one I wanted to wear that night. I stared at them for a long time because I had never been asked to choose before. Finally, I pointed to the middle one, the set with small flowers on it. She smiled and left me alone to change. I noticed the door had a lock, but it only worked from the inside. Nobody could lock me in. I sat on the bed after I changed, and the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking downstairs. Without my sisters breathing nearby, the silence felt huge and wrong, like something important was missing. But it also felt lighter somehow, like I could breathe deeper without matching my breath to theirs. I lay down and pulled the blanket up. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without listening for Mom's footsteps in the hallway or checking if my sisters were still there. The next morning, Christina picked me up and drove me to my first therapy appointment with a man named Ephraim Johnston, who had an office in a building downtown. He was maybe 40, with a calm voice. He did not try to shake my hand when I came in. He only gestured to a comfortable chair and sat down across from me. He explained that we were going to work on very small, realistic goals, things like getting through each day and starting to figure out who I was as a separate person. He did not promise he would fix me. He did not promise he would heal me. He did not promise everything would get better. He only said we would work on coping and surviving. That felt more honest than false hope would have, and I nodded to show I understood. He asked me what I was feeling right now. I told him I did not know. Everything was too mixed up to separate. He said that was okay. We would work on that too, learning how to tell one feeling from another. Later in the session, Christina joined us and they discussed school reentry plans. They talked about whether I should go back to regular school, continue homeschooling, or try online classes. I mentioned that I had always wanted to try soccer, but could not because Violet hated sports, and if one of us did something, all of us had to. Ephraim wrote this down in his notebook and said we could explore that, but he explained that the timing might not be right yet, while everything was so unstable with court dates and adjustments to foster care. I felt disappointed, but I understood what he meant. There was too much chaos right now to add more new things. A few days later, Bridget came to visit me at the foster home and asked me to start keeping a journal of memories that were specifically mine, not shared experiences with my sisters. She wanted me to document how our individual identities had been suppressed. She wanted me to write down moments that belonged only to me. I sat with the blank notebook that night and tried to think of memories that were just mine. But everything was tangled up with my sisters because we had been forced to do everything together. I could not remember the last time I did something alone or had a thought that was only my own. I wrote that down and showed Bridget the next time she visited. She said the struggle itself was evidence of what our parents had done to us. The fact that I could not find individual memories proved how thoroughly they had erased our separate selves. About a week after I started the journal, Christina called with news about the Mexican clinic. She told me they had gotten word that the clinic had either shut down or moved locations, and the lead on the unlicensed doctor had gone cold. My stomach twisted when she said that, because it meant he was still out there somewhere doing this to other kids. I felt guilty, even though I knew it was not my fault. Bridget reminded me later that I was 16, and stopping international medical criminals was not my responsibility, but the guilt sat heavy anyway. I kept thinking about other girls who might end up on that surgery table because we did not catch him in time. A week after the custody hearing, I was scrolling through social media on my phone when I got a message request from an account I did not recognize. The profile picture was blank, and the username was just random letters and numbers. I opened it and the message said, "We can still fix you. We can still make you perfect. We love you." I knew immediately that it was from my parents, violating the no-contact order. My hands started shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I screenshotted the message like Christina had taught me to do and sent it to her right away. Then I blocked the account and deleted the message request. Christina called me back within an hour and told me she was forwarding it to Hayes and the prosecutor. 2 days later, Christina called again to tell me that Hayes had traced the fake social media account back to Dad's work computer using the IP address. He was filing a motion for contempt of court because my parents had violated the no-contact order. Christina said this proved I had been right to report it and that consequences were happening. That helped calm the panic that flared up when I first saw their message. The next week, I had my first supervised visit with my sisters at a neutral visitation center, a plain building with meeting rooms and cameras everywhere. As soon as we were in the same room, we started arguing about whose fault this was and who should have done what differently. Violet said I should have stayed quiet and then we would all still be together. I snapped back that together meant drugged and heading for surgery. Ruby started crying and said she just wanted everything to go back to normal. Hazel yelled that there was no normal to go back to. The supervisor sat quietly and let us work through it instead of shutting us down. Eventually, we were all crying and hugging each other and admitting that we were scared and grieving, even though we were also safer. We held on to each other for a long time. I realized this was the first time we had touched in weeks, the first time we had been close without being forced to match. A few days after that visit, Christina took Hazel to an appointment with an orthopedic specialist who examined her back and took x-rays. The doctor confirmed that the forced slouching had damaged her spine in ways that would require physical therapy and might cause chronic pain for the rest of her life. Hazel sat in the car afterward, looking angry and sad at the same time. I did not know how to help her accept that some of what our parents had done could not be undone. She kept asking why they would do this to her, why they could not just let her be tall. I did not have any answers that made sense. The following week, Ruby saw an ENT doctor who looked at her throat and did tests on her voice. He diagnosed vocal nodules from the forced voice training and explained that she would need months of vocal rest and therapy. Even then, her voice might never sound exactly the same as it did before. Ruby cried in the examination room because she had been amazing at violin and singing, and now her voice might be permanently damaged. I held her hand while she grieved what had been taken from her. I thought about how our parents stole so many things from us that we would never get back. 2 days after Ruby's ENT appointment, Christina called to tell me Violet had another crisis at her foster home. They were moving her to an inpatient psychiatric program where she could get more help. I asked if I could visit her. Christina said not yet, but I could write letters. So I started writing Violet every single day about completely normal things, like how the weather was sunny or rainy, what I had for breakfast, what show I watched on TV. I told her about the foster family's cat, who sat on my lap while I did homework, and how the neighbor's dog barked at squirrels every morning. I wrote about the little things because I wanted her to know there was a regular world out here waiting for her when she was ready to come back to it. I never mentioned Mom or Dad, or the surgeries, or any of the bad stuff. I only gave her normal, boring details that proved life could be simple and safe. A week later, Christina came to my foster home and sat down at the kitchen table with me to explain that the prosecutor had formally filed criminal charges against our parents for child neglect and endangerment. She showed me the paperwork with all the official legal language and told me the court process would take months, maybe even a year, to work through the system. I felt this weird mix of relief that something was actually happening, exhaustion because it was not over yet, and guilt because they were still my parents even though they hurt us. Christina must have seen it on my face because she told me to talk to Ephraim about it. At my next therapy session, I told Ephraim about the charges and how I felt relieved and exhausted and guilty all at the same time. He said that was completely normal. He explained that having mixed feelings about people who hurt you does not mean you are weak or confused. It just means you are human, and the situation is complicated. That helped a little bit, but the guilt still sat in my stomach like a rock. The following week, Bridget came to the foster home and told me we needed to start preparing for the extended custody hearing, where I might have to testify in front of the judge. We sat in the living room, and she asked me practice questions. Why did you not tell anyone sooner? Why did you not just run away? I tried to answer calmly at first, but the questions made me so mad because they sounded like she was blaming me. My voice got louder, and I told her I was scared and controlled. I told her I did try to run away. I told her they locked us in. Bridget nodded and said that anger was good. She said I needed to be able to access it to protect myself on the stand. She explained that my parents' lawyer would try to make me doubt myself and get confused, so I needed to practice staying strong and clear even when I was upset. We did the practice questions over and over until I could answer them without my voice shaking too much. A few days later, Christina forwarded me a legal document that my parents' attorney had filed with the court. I sat on my bed and read through it, and the words made me feel like I was going crazy. Their lawyer argued that homeschooling rights and religious freedom protected their parenting choices. He was trying to reframe everything they did to us as a family's private, educational, and spiritual decisions. The motion talked about parental authority, traditional values, and family autonomy. Like those words somehow made the chest binding and forced sedation okay. I read it 3 times, and each time I felt more disconnected from reality because they were describing a completely different world than the one I had actually lived in. It was like they took all the facts and twisted them into something unrecognizable. I showed the document to my foster mom and asked her if I was the crazy one. Maybe I was remembering wrong. She hugged me and said, "No, you are not crazy. Sometimes people in power use fancy words to hide ugly truths." That weekend, I was unpacking a donated bag of clothes in my room, sorting through shirts and jeans that someone had dropped off for me. At the bottom of the bag, I found an old photograph that must have gotten mixed in by accident. I pulled it out, and my hands started shaking, because it was from before the matching started. I was maybe 4 or 5 years old in the picture. The photo showed 4 little girls who actually looked like 4 different people. One had curly hair, one had straight hair, one was taller, one was smaller. We were wearing different colored shirts and smiling different smiles. I stared at my younger face in the picture and tried to remember who that girl was. What did she like? What made her different from her sisters? But the memories were so faded and buried under years of forced sameness that I could barely find them. I put the photo in my nightstand drawer because looking at it hurt too much. But I also could not throw it away. 3 weeks later, the extended custody hearing started on a cold morning in February. Bridget picked me up early, and we drove to the courthouse together. She reminded me to look at the judge when I talked, not at my parents, and to take my time answering questions. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly. My parents sat at a table with their lawyer. When I walked in, Mom started crying. I forced myself to look away and focus on the judge's desk. The bailiff called me to the witness stand. I put my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. My voice shook when I started talking, but Bridget had been right. It got steadier as I went. I told the judge about the surveillance cameras in every room, including the bathroom. I told him about the chest binding that made Violet pass out. I told him about the forced sedation the night before the airport. I described the surgery plans, the Mexican clinic, and the $20,000 my parents had paid up front. I looked at the judge's face instead of my parents', and that helped me keep talking even when my throat got tight. When I finished my testimony, my parents' lawyer stood up for cross-examination. He was an older man in a gray suit, and he smiled at me in a way that was supposed to look kind but felt mean. He suggested that maybe I had manipulated my sisters into being afraid. He suggested that maybe I made up the surgery plans to get attention because I was jealous of their bond. He said it in this smooth voice, like he was only asking reasonable questions. I felt anger flare hot in my chest, and I remembered what Bridget taught me about using that anger. I looked right at him and gave him specific details. I told him the clinic's name was Centro de Modificaciones Estética in Tijuana. I told him the exact amount was $20,000, paid by wire transfer on a specific date. I listed the exact procedures that were planned: the bone shaving, the rib removal, the vocal cord alteration. I watched his face change as he realized I had way more concrete information than he expected. He tried a few more questions, but I countered each one with specific facts and dates. Eventually, he sat down. After a break, Albina Maher took the stand as an expert witness. She was wearing professional clothes, and her voice was calm and clinical as she described the medical evidence. She explained the binding injuries on Violet's chest, the chemical burns on all of our scalps from the hair dye, and the injection marks on our necks from the forced sedation. She used medical terms and showed photos on a screen. She talked about the serious health risks we were facing. Her testimony was so factual and scientific that it was harder for anyone to dismiss what happened as strict parenting or cultural differences. She did not get emotional or dramatic. She just presented the evidence like the medical professional she was. Then Hayes took the stand and described the airport intervention in clear chronological order. He talked about noticing us unconscious on the luggage cart, about the airline agent's concerns, and about finding the injection marks. He described searching our house and finding the locks, the cameras, and the logs. He presented the evidence chain showing how everything connected. His testimony showed how many systems had failed to catch this earlier. How many people had seen us and never questioned why 4 teenage girls always looked exactly the same. He talked about how close we came to being on that plane to Mexico and what would have happened if that airline agent had not noticed something was wrong. When he finished testifying, the judge took a short break to review all the evidence. We sat in the hallway waiting, and I could hear my parents talking to their lawyer through the door. Mom's voice was high and angry. When we went back in, the judge looked tired. He read from his notes for a few minutes about the evidence, the law, and what his responsibilities were. Then he announced his decision. He was extending our removal from our parents' custody for a full year. He ordered psychological evaluations for both mom and dad before any custody could be reconsidered. He limited them to supervised contact only at approved facilities with trained monitors present. I felt a wave of relief wash over me so strong I almost cried. But mixed with the relief was a strange grief that sat heavy in my chest, because even though they hurt us, they were still my parents. Some part of me had wanted them to fight for us differently, to admit what they did was wrong, to promise to change. But they just sat there looking angry and betrayed, like we were the ones who had hurt them. Bridget squeezed my shoulder, and Christina smiled at me from across the room. The judge banged his gavel and said court was adjourned. And just like that, it was over for now. 2 weeks passed before Christina called with news that made my hands shake. She had found a foster family willing to take all 4 of us together. They were a couple in their 50s who had fostered sibling groups before and had a house with enough bedrooms for everyone. We moved in on a Saturday morning, and the foster mom showed us each to our own rooms. It felt weird and wrong at first. But then I heard Violet's voice through the wall, and Ruby's footsteps upstairs, and Hazel humming in the bathroom, and the world stopped feeling so tilted. That night, we all ended up sleeping on the floor of the living room anyway, because being apart in separate rooms was too much too fast. The foster parents did not make us go back to our rooms. They just brought down extra blankets and said we would figure it out at our own pace. Ephraim started coming to the house twice a week for group sessions, where we worked on what he called boundary practice. The first exercise was picking snacks from the pantry. We all reached for the same box of crackers before catching ourselves. Ephraim made us go back and each choose something different. It took me 10 minutes to decide between chips and cookies because I kept looking at what my sisters were picking. We practiced choosing different TV shows, different seats at the table, and different times to take showers. It sounded stupid and simple, but my chest got tight every time I made a choice that did not match theirs. Ruby picked grape juice. I picked orange. Violet picked water. Hazel picked lemonade. We all just stared at our different drinks like we had done something dangerous. The foster dad said it was the bravest thing he had seen in years. I signed up for a community soccer clinic that met Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the park near our house. The first night I showed up in borrowed cleats that did not quite fit and shorts that were actually mine, not matching anyone. The coach put me through basic drills, and I was terrible at it. I tripped over the ball. I kicked it in the wrong directions. But when I ran down the field chasing after it, with nobody matching my steps or my speed, something in my chest loosened, like a knot coming undone. I was slow and clumsy, and my lungs burned. But it was mine. This awkward learning belonged only to me. After practice, I texted my sisters about how bad I was, and they sent back laughing emojis. That felt good too. Being able to be terrible at something without dragging them down with me. The visitation center hosted a music hour on Wednesday afternoons, and Ruby brought her violin for the first time in months. Her hands shook when she lifted the bow, and her first notes were scratchy and off-key. She could not sing along anymore because her voice was still damaged and hoarse, but she played through a simple song anyway. When she finished, the supervisor clapped and told us this was what healing actually looked like. Not perfect, not erased, just moving forward anyway. Ruby's eyes filled up, but she was smiling. I realized I had not seen her really smile in years. We had our first supervised visit with our parents the next week in a small room with cameras and a monitor sitting in the corner. Mom cried the second she saw us, and Dad's voice broke when he said our names. They begged us to forgive them and said they only wanted us to be special and loved. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled back, remembering what Ephraim had taught us about boundaries. I told them we needed them to accept responsibility for what they had done before we could talk about forgiveness. Violet said the surgeries would have hurt us permanently. Hazel mentioned her spine, which still ached every morning. Ruby touched her throat where her voice used to be strong. Our parents' faces changed, like they were not expecting us to stand firm or speak up for ourselves. Dad started to argue, but the monitor cut him off and said our time was up. Walking out, I felt guilty and relieved and sad all mixed together. 3 days later, Christina called with news about the Mexican clinic. Authorities had flagged the information in a federal database, and an investigation was starting. That meant other families might be protected from what almost happened to us. I exhaled this specific fear I had been carrying around about other girls ending up on that surgery table. Other sisters being cut apart to match. It did not fix what happened to us, but it meant something that maybe we had stopped it from happening to someone else. 4 months after the airport intervention, we were sitting around the foster family's dinner table eating tacos that we each made differently. Hazel mentioned that she was thinking about cutting her hair shorter. Really short. Maybe even buzzed on the sides. Ruby said she wanted to grow hers longer. Past her shoulders for the first time since she was little. Violet wanted to try a completely different color. Maybe red or purple. Something that did not look like the rest of us at all. We looked at each other and started laughing. Because we were choosing different looks on purpose. We were claiming our own faces back one decision at a time. The foster mom offered to take us to the salon on Saturday, and we spent an hour looking at pictures on her phone of different hairstyles. Each of us picked something totally separate. The final custody hearing happened on a cold morning in November. The judge reviewed all the evidence again and listened to updated reports from Christina, Ephraim, and our doctors. He granted long-term guardianship to the state, with our foster family as our permanent placement. He ordered individualized education plans for each of us, along with separate medical care and therapy. He issued an injunction barring our parents from making any decisions about body modification or medical procedures for us. It was not a fairy tale ending where everything was fixed and everyone was happy, but it was real safety, with legal protection behind it. And that mattered more than perfect. 5 months after everything changed, I walked into the drugstore by myself to buy pads. I did not hide them under other items or pretend I was buying them for someone else. The cashier rang them up like it was normal. Because it was normal. I texted my sisters a dumb meme about period cramps on my way home, and they responded at different times with different reactions. That afternoon, in Ephraim's office, I admitted the road ahead was still long and hard. I told him about the nightmares where I woke up thinking I was still in that van heading to the airport. I mentioned how sometimes I still reached for the same things my sisters picked without thinking. But I also told him we would not be forced into identical bodies ever again. We were learning to be 4 separate people who chose to love each other. And that was harder. And better. And more real than anything we had before. That is my side of it. The part that matters now is hearing what other people notice, because sometimes they spot things I still miss. Share your take in the comments. I will be reading.